Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and we greatly appreciate you joining with us today. With these podcasts, we hope to explore some of the issues that touch us, our families, and our community, especially in light of the ongoing revolution in longevity that is, as you know, is helping to reshape the Jewish world. We appreciate your support, and you can follow us and listen to previous podcasts by going to our website, jewishsacredaging.com, as well as visiting our Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook. It's getting difficult to say that, locked in my study. Anyway, welcome, and with great pleasure, we welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning Rabbi Eric Yoffie, the immediate past president of the Union for Reform Judaism, a blogger and a columnist, a contributing columnist to the English language edition of Haaretz. Eric, good to see you. Good to see you. And
good to be here.
For full disclosure, my former boss.
We worked together many years.
That's true. That's true. So, as we mentioned, and this is part of an ongoing series that we're doing here in Jewish Sacred Aging, with really trying to explore some of the issues that are going to be impacting our community as we hopefully emerge from this last year and 3 or 4 months of COVID pandemic. And Rabbi Yoffie is a world-recognized expert on the relationship that we have with the American Jewish community and the State of Israel. And also, for full disclosure, we're recording this on a day that is celebrating worldwide the anniversary of Israel's independence. So it's sort of like beshert, if I can throw that word in, that perhaps we're talking about this. So, Eric, one of the things, and again, I thank you very, very much for being with us. I want to talk about this, or is there this shift? You've been a commentator now on all these elections. We've just walked through the 4th election in a year and a half, 2 years in Israel.
2 years, yeah.
The political shifts in Israel, the election of a progressive rabbi to the Knesset. From your perspective, how has this, can I say, election turmoil impacted the way we in the United States Jewish community relate to the State of Israel? Is there a shift? Are you picking up a shift in the support of Israel on the part of Amcha, the people in the pew, the people of the United States Jewish community?
I think there has been changes without any question. I don't know how much it's related to the election cycle. My own view is that American Jews have mostly turned off this whole election question because, over 2 years now, one election after another, it's very hard to maintain interest and even have any conception of what's going on. So I don't think that's been a primary factor. But I do think it's true that over the last decade, and in particular over the last 3 to 4 years, we've seen some shift, a certain pulling away between the two major communities of Jews in the world. The 9% of Jews in the world live in either in North America or in Israel. So the overwhelming majority, the world's Jewish population. And I think we're drifting away a bit. It concerns me a good deal, but I do think I think it's a reality. And the key, we'll go into the reasons. The key is not to see what they're doing to us or what we're doing to them. I think it's because of factors that are operating on both sides. Things that are happening in Israel that American Jews are responding to, but also things that are happening here that are pushing us perhaps, away from what have been our traditional commitments.
So give me an example of those. Is it generational? Is it more generational, or is it more sociological, political, economic?
And well, the answer, it seems to me, is all of the above. Some of the big picture issues, which aren't new, but nonetheless we should mention them. You have on the American side, you have a fading historical memory, and American Jews who are 60 and over, And they look at the Holocaust, for example, which is a big part of our Israel consciousness. And so they look at the Holocaust and they think, pure evil, industrialized extermination, 1/3 of the Jewish people murdered, 1.5 million children, Jewish children are dead. They think of their own family members who've been lost. And from that, you jump to, consciously or unconsciously, Jews need power. They need a Jewish refuge. They need a Jewish army. For young American Jews, the Holocaust is a chapter in a history book. And no matter how much we say don't make Holocaust analogies, and the Holocaust is uniquely evil, which is absolutely true, you hear people making Holocaust analogies all the time, inappropriate ones. The point being, the Holocaust has become just one more tragedy in a very long line of tragedies for young Jews, and as a result, the Israel part of this thinking has kind of fallen away. Another example is our sense of Israel as a miracle has also dissipated. A little more than 70 years ago, I mean, today's an independence day, 73 years, the Jewish state was proclaimed. There were 600,000 Jews surrounded by enemies, an army with primitive weaponry in a tiny, struggling economy, and followed by a war in which 1% of the population, we forget this often, of the population of Israel was killed in that war. And then following that, the Israelis built a state out of nothing, literally nothing. They created military capacity, and then an economic capacity, and so on. But for young people today, when they look at Israel, they don't think of that. They don't. That's not where their Jewish consciousness leads them. What they see is a country of 9 million people, relatively rich, reasonably secure, a regional military power. The Six-Day War changed my life as a Jew because Israel was endangered and I was terrified. For young Jews today, the Six-Day War is what? It's the beginning of the occupation. So, and then, the other factor that's very important to mention is, in my view, distance from Israel is directly related to the question of Jewish commitment, our acceptance into American society, the assimilation that we're undergoing. This is my premise. Committed Jews are not indifferent about Israel. Engaged Jews are not indifferent about Israel. They may not be happy with Israel. They may be angry with Israel, confused, even furious, enraged, but they're not indifferent. If you're Jewishly engaged, you understand that you can't separate out the strands of land and language and peoplehood from the strands of religion and spirituality. Those two are inextricably intertwined. So then the issue is, are we in fact less engaged as American Jews in our Judaism? And the answer is yes and no. We have a committed core. I would define it as being about 30% of the American Jewish population, roughly the number that's affiliated with synagogues. These are the people who are observant to some degree or involved in Jewish organizations. And then you have the roughly 65 to 70% who are outside of that core. And there's a whole spectrum. Some are sort of totally indifferent. Some have a occasional episodic connection. But the point being, the committed core is very engaged in Israel in one way or another, and the uncommitted much less so. So to some extent, this is our issue. We need to take the commitment of the core and extend it to the broad Jewish masses. And once we do, the Israel issue will also, be engaged as well. So those are some of the things that are going on. What about the Israelis? Are they doing things that are a problem for us? How committed are they? So we have to ask those questions. Ronald Lauder wrote an article 3 years ago. It was a very important article, and I like to refer to it because I'm a liberal. Ronald Lauder's a conservative. He's a Republican. He's a Likud supporter. He's a friend of Netanyahu. All things that I am not. And Lauder wrote that Israel is doing two things that are alienating Jews around the world and distancing them from Israel. The first, he said, is settling large number of settlers throughout the West Bank, outside of the settlement blocks that Israel will keep in any peace agreement. And the second is leaving control of religious affairs in the hands of this coercive state-sponsored rabbinate. And Lauder talked about both areas. And he said, we have to change. And indeed, we must. And those two issues, it seems to me, I mean, there are 100 different issues we could talk about if we were dealing with issues of, matters of Israeli policy. But those two issues really are the key. The settlement question distresses us a lot, particularly young Jews, but all American Jews. And, Prime Minister Netanyahu said recently that he intends to build in every area of Judea and Samaria. So, look, let me say this as a committed American Jew and as a Zionist. This is lunacy. It's just lunacy. It only makes sense if you intend to keep the territories, which will lead either to some kind of quasi-apartheid or to a binational state. And it just won't work. I mean, you can't control a foreign people through military means. The British couldn't do it in India or in Ireland. The French, couldn't do it in Algeria, and Israel can't do it in the West Bank either. And I've spent much of my life in the rabbinate making Israel's case in the interfaith world and on campus and so on. You can convince people of the justice of Israel's cause and the need for there to be some territorial concessions on the Palestinian side in order for there to be peace. But you can't convince people that it makes sense to expand a large settler population into the heart of the West Bank. You can't convince them because it doesn't make sense. And Israel needs to stop doing it. Israel needs to stop doing it, not for the sake of the Palestinians and not for the sake of the BDS people who are in many cases anti-Semitic, and not for the sake of the international community, which is hostile towards us in many cases. But we need to do it simply because it's the right thing to do, because every alternative is worse. And then the other issue is, of course, the religious question, which is hugely important to us, something the Israelis do not understand. You have this fanatic fundamentalist chief rabbinate. It proclaims that Reform and conservative Jews are treif, and that our synagogues are houses of harlotry, and that 500,000 Israeli Jews don't meet their standards and can't be married in the Jewish state, and it forbids civil marriage and public transportation on Shabbat, and doesn't permit yeshiva students to serve in the army and meet their obligations as citizens, and on and on and on. Look, I defy anyone to give me a single example in all of human history of a state-sponsored religious monopoly that actually advanced the values of the religious tradition that it was meant to serve. Israel was created to bring about a moral and spiritual renaissance of the Jewish people. That's our view. It was created to be a vehicle of Yiddishkeit. And that means that you have to have a message of Torah that's inclusive and morally compelling, that emanates from Jerusalem to the whole Jewish world. The chief rabbinate is incapable of that. Will always be incapable of that. We all stood at Sinai. And if that's the case, the Jewish people throughout the world is tired of excuses about coalition politics and so on and so forth. Is everything coalition politics? Or there's some other values that we have to be concerned about. So Lauder spoke about these issues very eloquently, and he's right. They right now are a substantial reason for the discomfort that many American Jews, even those who are most committed to Israel, who love Israel and embrace Israel, but these two issues are issues that distress them and cause distance between these two great centers of Jewish life.
So, Eric, what you're saying, part of what you're saying is right now in this particular period of history, is it your opinion that Israel has lost its sense of true vision?
Well, what I'm saying is that, first of all, I have a different vision of what Zionism is. And let's be clear, I'm sympathetic to Israel. I embrace Israel. I think we need a Jewish state. I believe that Israel provides a model of Jewish life that is desperately needed. It provides a model of an immersive Judaism, which is a national and collective in its outlook, different from American Judaism, but nonetheless one that balances our approach with a different approach that is collective. But there are fundamental issues in which Israel's current leadership feels it is advancing their interests, which put it at odds with much of the Jewish world, and also, in my view, ultimately undermine their interests and don't serve the broader vision, which was the Zionist vision that brought Israel into being. Now, it's not my decision, of course, to make those calls. Israel citizens have to make those judgments. But I'm acknowledging it's causing distance between the two communities, and it's pushing me to say we need a loyal opposition. That's what we need to become now. We need a loyal opposition that's going to fight for a different vision of Jewish life, and in particular of Israeli life. We're not going to turn our backs on Israel. We're not going to walk away from Israel because loving Israel a little harder than it is. Israel's not Disneyland. It's not summer camp. It's a real state with real problems, security issues, that I appreciate and understand. But nonetheless, it's following a course that's hard for us to accept, understand, and embrace in the traditional way. And my own view, by the way, is part of it's related to the particular set of leaders that Israel has right now. We've just gone through a period in America where we didn't have the best leadership. I think it's fair to say, to use the language of understatement. We now have a new administration. I'm looking forward to seeing a different government in Israel, which I think potentially will respond to some of these issues, in particular the issues of world Jewry and the relationship between these two communities in a different way.
There's been a lot made in our community, in the liberal community, with the election to the Knesset of a progressive Rabbi Kariv. Does this signal a new era, or is this just symbolic, or how do you relate to what this is? Do you think this is any opening of a larger growth or representation of progressive Judaism?
Well, first of all, I think the election is hugely important. Rabbi Kariv, Gilad Kariv, has been the leader of the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. Obviously, he gave up that position in order to enter the Knesset as a member of the Labor Party. On the one hand, in concrete political terms, it doesn't change much in the sense that he's one person.
One
Having said
person.
that, he's one person, and we have this fundamental reality of two ultra orthodox parties and other parties that also have ties to the Orthodox religious world, but two ultra Orthodox parties that have about 15 or 16 seats in the Knesset. They're often the swing vote, and it gives them outsized power and influence in the coalition negotiations. But does it make a difference to have a reform rabbi, a kippah wearing reform leader serving in the Knesset, who day to day can raise the issues that we have as Reform Jews? And the answer, it absolutely does. It'll make a huge difference. Even there are parties in the Knesset that are sympathetic to us and so on, and some have been very helpful over the years without going into all those politics. But now we have somebody for whom this is a central issue, not just an incidental issue. And every time a religious concern is raised, Rabbi Gilad Kariv is going to be there to respond. I recently wrote about this. I said he's going to drive them crazy. He's going to hold them. He's going to hold them accountable. Every time they raise an issue that supports the religious coercion to which they are committed, he is going to be there to give a speech, and he's a wonderful speaker, and to question their judgment and to demand answers. They have said that they won't speak to him or acknowledge him. I mean, a Knesset member just in the last day or two was asked, when you walk by Rabbi Kariv in the Knesset, will you say hello? Will you acknowledge him? And he said, no, I won't, because Jewish tradition, we don't acknowledge evil people. So this is what we're dealing with here. My own view is that's wonderful. Let them ignore him, boycott him, and so on. It will bring the attention of the entire world of Israel to what they're doing, to who they are, to how they see themselves as Jews. They said that they won't let Gilad Karif pray with them. So, can you imagine in the Knesset, the legislative body of the Jewish state, a group of religious Jews are saying that another religious Jew who wants to pray with them will be forbidden to do so. This will give Rabbi Kariv even, more of a role in the public consciousness in Israel. Will draw the attention of the news media, and it'll give him even greater legitimacy than he has simply by virtue of being elected. But it's going to be an interesting time. Look, does Israel have a Jewish soul or not? Or is everything defined by coalition politics? How does Israel support and recognize all Jews, Reform and conservative Jews? How does the Jewish world bring the Jews to Torah? These are the questions that Gilad Kariv is going to be asking, and is going to be pointing out day after day, there is more than one way to be Jewish, and most Israelis do not accept your way, they accept my way. So I'm enormously excited about his place in the legislature of the Jewish state, and I think it's going to make a huge difference.
Do you think this is going to open the door for other like-minded people, colleagues, who will enter this arena and say, if he can do it, I can do it?
Maybe. Look, the truth of the matter is our primary job as a religious movement is to build a grassroots presence in the Jewish state. I'm somebody who always opposed a reform party when people said we have to build a party of our own and so on. So that isn't our job. Our job is to be a religious movement, and that means to build our synagogues and our other institutions, so Israelis will know who we are, but not only that, will embrace us because of our religious vision. Now, Rabbi Kariv decided he didn't run in the Reform Party. He was interested in politics. He felt he could make a difference. He joined the Labor Party and was elected in their primary, and that was a wonderful decision. But if you're asking more broadly, is this the route for us to go? And the answer is, I don't think so. The route for us to go is to become a presence on the ground in the Jewish state.
So, Eric, based upon your experience and your wealth of experience within the American Jewish community, and you led the Reform movement wonderfully for years, the statistics, that you were talking about, which are fairly, as you know, representatives, the 70-30 split. Another recent poll that came out that says, I think in February, that amongst the Jewish community, one of the largest growing cohorts are people who identify as Jewish, but not with no religion. And if the idea that you're talking about in Israel is building a religious movement, translate that now back home. We're in this tremendous age of transition. We're going to be moving out of this pandemic. How do we begin to touch those 70% who are just not there, or there marginally? Because this seems to me that's really one of our major challenges moving forward. How do we begin to reach out to that 70%?
I think we have an opportunity now. We've gone through this crisis. It's not over yet. Still fighting COVID. But we as a Jewish community have responded, I think, quite in quite an extraordinary way to this crisis. But the fact of the matter is, the COVID pandemic created certain realities here. I was looking at some statistics recently. 4 in 10 US adults had developed symptoms of depression or anxiety by the end of 2020, 4 out of 10, which was a sharp increase over the previous year. Isolation is not our natural state. And, we need family, we need friends, we need communities. And then there's the loneliness issue. The gold standard for measuring loneliness is the UCLA loneliness scale. And 61% of Americans are measurably lonely, according to that loneliness scale, which is a frightening number. Now, some of that has to do with overworking, and some of it has to do with overscheduling, and some of it probably with overparenting. But the truth is, all of these problems were heightened in a significant way by the pandemic, where we were locked up in our homes. I mean, some of us, of course, it meant we got to know the people in our household a little better. But for a lot of people, it meant that the depression and the anxiety and the loneliness, were heightened, were worsened, and particularly for the lonely middle-aged people or the isolated elderly, it was disastrous. And what that means, it seems to me, is it emphasizes to us the importance of face-to-face religious community. What I've learned looking back at the pandemic, on the one hand, I want to repeat, we as a Jewish community, we were resourceful, we needed to be, and we were. We used technology. We created a Judaism that was hybrid and inclusive and creative, and I applaud us for that. We also rejuvenated some dwindling communities through our use of Zoom. But what we mostly learned is how much we miss tactile, face-to-face Judaism. So my view is that when the pandemic is over, people aren't going to drift back to synagogues. They're going to run back to synagogues. Because the religious communities that we offer are going to be, I mean, it's not new, but they're going to be more important than they have ever been, because they need to balance this experience of loneliness and isolation to which so much of us have been subjected. The synagogue can do that in a way that nothing else can. It's the one place where there always cares about you as an individual, and where if you're not there, someone misses you, and no one suffers alone, no one grieves alone. And all of this, of course, done in a context of Jewish commandments, rituals, and values. So what we need to do in the synagogue world is we need to seize that. We need to build face-to-face communities. God insisted that when he met with Moses, it would be panim el panim, face-to-face. We can offer face-to-face communities at a moment when the world is hungry for them, and the Jewish world in particular, because of where we sit sort of in the socioeconomic scheme of things. And I mean, for example, many Jews in our community are not going to go back to being in the office every day. Some won't go back at all. Others will go back 2 days a week, 3 days a week, but will spend a couple days at home. This makes the synagogue more important. You simply cannot spend your entire day in front of a screen. You can't do it. So if we understand that as an opportunity, if we want to retrieve the Jewish soul from oblivion and unveil, the fundamental holiness of life, it's not going to be on the screen. I believe it can be in the synagogue.
Rabbi Eric Yoffie. Eric, thank you very much. That you present again another, as you usually do, some significant challenges to the community, to congregations, to revision how they're going to analyze and bring back and support that panim el panim. I think that's part of our challenge of synagogue leadership right now, as well as this shift, as you elucidated, in the perception and support of the state of Israel. And I'm glad you raised that, the Six Day, because from our generation, we remember the 6 Day War and the 73 War as pivotal, very pivotal moments. I'm concerned as you are with not one of my children, but also my grandchildren. When they study this, it will not have that same impact, that emotional, standing and listening to the radio, watching the television, being totally engaged and watching the shift. So thank you for raising these challenges. Real fast, somebody wants to touch base with you. Your contact information for your blog is what?
It's ericyoffie.com. So they can go and read everything that I've written and see various podcasts and webinars and so on. ericyoffie.com.
And continued good luck with the column for the English language edition of Haaretz, and just stay safe and stay healthy. That's the most important thing right now. So well to your family too.
Thanks for the good
Eric,
work.
thank you very much. Thank you. Take care, man.
Bye.
And to all of you, thank you for watching and listening to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the TV show and podcast of Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember that the show is now available on the Roku streaming network. And again, we welcome your comments and suggestions, which you can email me, Rabbi address at jewishsacredaging.com. We invite you again to visit our Facebook page. And if you'd like to make a tax-free donation to support our work, please visit jewishsacredaging.com and click on the conveniently located donate icon. And a shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin, who is at Lubetkin Media Companies, who is the producer and where we are recorded from, which is probably not a good sentence. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to greeting you on the next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. Stay safe. Shalom.